That's us live on YouTube now.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Gábor Karsai, Managing Director of Mind and Life Europe. It's a real honor and privilege for us to have a very special guest, Valérie Bonnardel, here with us today. As you may know, this is the concluding talk in the series we developed this year entitled Francisco and Friends, an embodiment of relationship. In the context of our celebratory year, this year 2021, Francisco Varela's friends, colleagues, and dialogue partners share their personal experiences and insights from working with him and explore the influence of his special relationship on their lives and work. And today we have Valérie Bonnardel, Professor Bonnardel here with us, who is a reader in experimental psychology at the University of Winchester. She obtained her PhD under the supervision of Francisco Varela at the Institute of Neuroscience, University Pierre and Marie Curie in Paris. Since then, her research has focused on color science in its various aspects, including sensation, perception, and cognition, with a particular interest in inter-individual and cross-cultural differences. Professor Bonnardel had a research chair at the National Institute of Design in Ahmedabad, India, and was also the chair of the Color Group Great Britain, and is a member of the executive committee of the International Association of Color. Influenced by the work of Francisco Varela, she has been teaching a module since 2016 on embodied cognition and contemplative practice to psychology students. So it's a real honor, Valérie, to have you with us tonight and to hear from you about your experience working with Francisco and your research you did with him and ever since.
Well, thank you very much, Gábor. It's also a great pleasure to have been included in this series of Francisco and Friend, and I think that this series really take a particular meaning in the contemporary society in which we are. So it's a very precious initiative that Mind and Life Europe had to actually revive all this thinking, philosophy, and the way of doing science that Francisco was so keen with. So because we are talking about color, I saw from the previous presentation, it was a kind of informal talk, but I can't help myself to present some image. So, but it should be completely interactive and you can stop me at any time. And now I'm going to share my screen. So everybody should see the title. And what I would like to present today, after going back to some personal recollection with Francisco, is to indicate how, the view of embodied cognition and enaction is so well illustrated with perception of color, and how actually it was really useful to set up research, the research I set up in this context. So I think I already presented those slides a few months ago when we had a small meeting about Francisco, but that is a 3 window that corresponded to his lab in possibly 1985, because I'm not completely sure when he actually set up at the laboratory of visual neuroscience. I arrived in 86, and it was already the very beginning of setting up his lab. So at the very beginning, actually, there was only Adrien Palacios working on electrophysiology in pigeon, but working in color, and myself doing psychophysics in Francisco lab. I have to say that with some recollection, it was a very happy days. as you may imagine. And this was the view that we had, from our windows. And I have to say that during the summertime, during several summers I was there was a saxophonist coming during the summer. So it was pretty relaxed atmosphere, that while doing research, etc., we could feel, the joyful and pleasant activity taking place on the quay, and with a saxophonist that was, providing us jazz music. So it could have been a more difficult period for doing a PhD. With Francisco, if you had attended Adrien Palacios' talk, you would know that one of the questions was the dimensionality of the scholar space. So basically what I'm saying is we were already moving out the traditional realm of research. And for my research, Francisco gave me a paper, which was a paper written by Horace Barlow. And the question was, what caused trichromacy? Why humans with other primates are trichromates? So we were really moving from traditional system done on screen with 3 phosphors that I've represented here with the 3 color circle, red, green, and blue. And as you can see, the intersection are actually the secondary color in additive system. We were moving from that to a system where we were using actually natural color signal, meaning, the light, but not any kind of light, a light that would be modulated in certain way. I'm not going to go into those details, but what my point here is we were already using a system that was not used at all in the traditional laboratory of people who were actually investigating color. And we had only a theoretical paper to start with. So the idea was to implement this idea. I think I have difficulty to, okay. So yes, so this is the system that we had to build in Francisco lab. And underneath, it was actually, the principle was interesting because we were using the principle that was set up by Newton. So it was a pretty prestigious, first attempt to produce this kind of stimulus. So this is the schematic representation. And again, I'm not going into the detail, but we were able to elaborate something based on the Polaroid filter to modulate the light. And so in a way, this picture is taken during my PhD, my Viva, sorry, with one of the professors from Cambridge University. And I figured here that there is this natural color signal, sort of ideal natural color signal, which are sinusoidal modulation. And here you can see the modulation of the spectral light. And what Francisco and John Mullen are actually drawing is actually the ellipse. So this kind of light will draw ellipse in a chromaticity diagram. If I present this chromaticity diagram, it's because it's a referential, which is really a scientific construct with which we can actually express color measurement. So in other words, here we have 2 things. We have natural color signal represented, but we have also a construct based on experimental data that is the foundation for the color measurement. I need to remove, okay. And again, I've presented here the 3 primary light in an additive system, color system, to figure out that any 3 primary light system, like your screen or the TV that we used to have, is actually based on this principle of color measurement. So in other words, we know exactly which sort of intensity of light is necessary to present in order to present a particular color. I think, okay, right. This slide actually is a bit problematic for me, because I thought that I could use this slide to illustrate some kind of color physiology, but with the choice of colors that I put this time, I just want you to have some experience of color by fixing the center of the magenta rectangle. So if you fix, you are at home, you fix the center of this magenta rectangle, and you don't move your eyes. And in doing so, if you're not moving your eyes, there will be a projection on your retina, which will be steady, at a steady location. And you are exhausting, so to speak, your color mechanism. So we keep steady, you fix the center of the magenta square rectangle, and then I move to the next slide. And you probably have experienced another type of color, which is purely phenomenological color, which were red, green, and blue. So this, you can actually, this is a demonstration that everyone working on color enjoy to present, to indicate actually that there is, it's possible to have an experience of our color mechanism without color, and we call that after image. So this is actually experiencing when we have a magenta color, it's experiencing the non-green color. So when then the magenta disappears, we experience the green mechanism at work. And the same for the cyan, which is the red, and the same for the yellow, which becomes the blue. So now to get to the core of my argument, it's getting directly from cognition as an embodied action, and this is as we recognize, the publication correspond to the publication of the Embodied Mind, a cognitive science and human experience. Useless to say that this book was actually in writing, in preparation, in work, while I was doing my PhD. So I had not access, I don't have access to this book, and I had access to these books much later. But of course, at posteriori now, all our discussion about color with Francisco make complete sense, because I could then find his conception of color. And in particular, one sentence that I would like to share with you that kept my attention is: knowledge is a result of an ongoing interpretation that emerges from our capacity of understanding. And these capacities are rooted in the structure of our biological embodiment, but are lived and experienced within a domain of consensual action and cultural history. And this is really true for color. Enaction was seen in this context as an alternative or a middle way between objectivism, which is a recovery from a pre-given world, and idealism, which is a projection from an inner world. And objectivism and idealism was really the dominant, and is still the dominant way to investigate color. Francisco was adamant that, and not only Francisco, that with objectivism there is a problem, because if we understand, if we describe rather in a traditional way how we understand how color is processed up to the retina, we need to have first an illumination, a light source, which could be, the bulb, but which has been for a long time the sun, which is impinging on a surface. The surface itself has some property, which is represented here by its reflectance. And then the light is reflected in the eye, sorry. So actually what's reach the eye, the human eye, is a convolution or multiplication between the light bulb and the reflectance, which is considered as a stable property of surface, which reach the eye. In the eye, there is 3 types of photoreceptor. So we can consider that the perceived color could come from the level of excitation or the cone absorption from the 3 different photoreceptors here that will provide an indication of the color which is perceived. And this doesn't hold. The amount of excitation at the retinal level can account for the metric of color, can account for the fact that we can indeed display certain color with the correct amount of primary light to provide a certain stimulus. But it doesn't tell us how color are perceived. So in other words, this type of line of reasoning or the measurement of color tell us when 2 colors are alike, but doesn't tell us what the color looks like. And this is a standard demonstration. If you look at these 2 circles, you probably want to perceive that on the left-hand side, the inner circle is rather pinkish, whereas on the right-hand side, it's rather yellowish. And if you want to convince yourself that it's actually exactly the same chromaticity, it's the same color measurement as displayed on the screen, you can follow actually the line here and see that in this orange square, it's exactly the same color. So it indicates that it's not enough to have precisely the display, for instance, on a monitor of the precise amount of red, blue, green phosphor to produce the same color, because depending on the environment, we have a very different type of perception of the color. This type of, we can call it illusion, comes from the fact of color constancy. So this is what we call a color induction. And why color induction is actually the perceived color will depend on the next neighbor color, so to speak. So that there is many problems with objectivism, that there is no one-to-one relationship with the light, which reach the eye, and the color that will be perceived. And color induction was an example. But there is also issue with idealism. Idealism would say that actually color is a cultural construct that could influence perception, the perception of color. And one cultural construct that has, that was a very good candidate for this kind of idealism would be, of course, color vocabulary. That would be the idea that in an ethnic group, if there is only 2, 3, 4 color name, then do those people see the different color as we see them? For example, in society where we have as color name 8 or 10 or 12 color name. So there's been a lot of work stimulated by this interesting question, which were called as relativist or universalist. And again, there is in fact experimental data showing that the existence of a basic color term and the fact that there is different number of color term with comparing the different ethnic group actually obey to certain constraints. And it doesn't mean that those individuals don't see all the color. And actually, there is some universality in the construct of the basic color term, and the physiological mechanism are certainly universally shared. And it's also something that I had the opportunity to study with color preference. Color preference, of course, vary enormously with cultural factor, but nevertheless, we can extract also universal that seems to be at play. So to carry on with this exploration of a view of embodied cognition with color, I would like to look at the individual differences. And this image is actually providing you a snapshot, a photo of rosé wine, as you can see, as normal trichomat individuals see it. So I suppose most of us here, but I don't know, particularly if you are if you are a man, you might have a color vision deficiency. And on the right-hand side, exactly the same picture taken with a filter that allow us to see what a colorblind individual would see. If I choose this stimuli, it's because it's extremely ecologically relevant. Because wine or food is, of course, a very relevant stimulus. So I would like just to indicate two things. Although this perception is striking for us normal trichomat, because we see a huge difference between the two images, and possibly you may think that the attractiveness of color would be will completely disappear if you were colorblind. The thing I would like to draw your attention is first, this is a simulation of what a trichomat see from a dichromat point of view, but it doesn't tell us if the phenomenology of the dichromat is fundamentally different from our own phenomenology or experience rather, when we see color. In other words, it's very possible that we share a meal with this rosé wine with someone who is living in a completely different color world, as we can see that, and we may share a conversation without noticing that this person is actually living in a different color world. And as an argument to say that we can't really make hypotheses on what the phenomenology of colorblind are, as an argument, I would say that it was necessary to wait until the end of the 18th century to have the question of individual differences and color blindness to become a subject of interest. And it was only one century later with the crash of a train in Sweden, that it's become a subject of concern. So the difference in our color vision between us, I mean, among our species, has become an object of concern, a subject of concern very late, actually. And that came with the fact that in transportation, the speed was increasing. And indeed, the impairment in looking at signalization could lead to accident, although that was also criticized. But the point really I would like to make is we can't really infer in a complex situation such as wine tasting what actually is the experience of the dichromat. And that actually illustrates very much the idea of enaction and the structural coupling that Francisco Thompson and Roche talk in their book, that there is, during the development, a construction that takes place, which is an active sensory motor development with the object of interest and our perception. And it's very possible that in this situation for colorblind people, that the environment, social environment, has a huge impact on that. So this is one point about individual differences that I wanted to share with you. So we see that these capacities are rooted in the structure of our biological embodiment. So I take again this sentence. Surely, colorblind people are living in objectively different world, but they are lived and experienced within a domain of consensual action and cultural history. So this where the things start to be interesting, that actually this difference might not be that striking. But in opposition to that, there is another phenomenon which I would like to present to you, which is the dress. Some of you might have heard of it because it was a real buzz in 2015 in February. And at the time I was the chair of the color group, so we received a lot of email from the media begging for explanation, what is going on. So while I'm talking, you see this picture, photograph of a little dress, and probably some of you would see it white and gold, and some other might see it as blue and black. There's been plenty of experiments, there is a lot of things to say, but in essence, what I found striking again about this dress and the fact that it divides the population is first, the percept on which we are divided is not small differences, because we are talking about white and gold and blue and black. So it's really very different percepts. It's not subtle nuance that we could explain, that we could debate and we could explain on other physiological bases. And the fact also that this dress has emerged from the net. I mean, although there is, extremely skillful color scientists who are, playing with many of color illusion, nevertheless, it didn't come from a laboratory. It didn't come from the result of a research. It just comes spontaneously. And today, the explanation is the following: why we differ with the percept of this dress. So the idea is to say that the picture is actually a very poor photograph. So in a situation of impoverished stimuli, to speak in this term, meaning that it's not, we are not in the real life, we are not in the shop, we can't see the light which is illuminating this dress. Our mind needed to disambiguate, to reveal the color of the illuminant, and in order to understand the color of the dress. So the two percept, although there is, these are the most popular percept, because there are also people who see slightly different than those two options. But the majority of us is one category or the other. He would say that actually the gold and white is a percept which is consistent with a cool illumination. So that will mean that whatever, in the picture, for instance, the bottom right, we pick up some indication about the illuminant, and we consider that it's a cool illuminant, or the cool illuminant, it's a morning light. And then the brain, although I don't like to talk about the brain so much, actually, apply this hypothesis in order to provide a consistent percept. Now, for the black and blue, it will be, on the contrary, a warm illuminant. So together, the scientific explanation, people come with color constancy. So color constancy relates very much to this objectivist view, and prior is very subjective view or idealist view. The prior are indeed the expectation that our mind is having before being able to see, a coherent picture, a coherent, stimulus. So, interestingly enough, with this example of the dress, we see the two elements of objectivism and idealism. So, objectivism is the idea to construct a world which is pre-given, which is there. And idealism is actually also, projecting a world which has been constructed from, inside. And both make, of course, a strong commitment with representation, which, as we know, is probably something that was completely out of the game of the explanation in Francisco view. So I think this was my last slide, and I will be happy to hear about your comment on this very small presentation.
Thank you very much, Valérie.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Maybe you can stop your screen sharing. Thank you very much. This was a really interesting talk. We could have a little glimpse at your work with Francisco and the lab, and also the photo you shared. That was very touching. And I would like to invite everyone present here to think about questions, and we would like to open up the space for discussions. Before maybe giving the voice to anyone who is raising his hand or her hand or posting a question in the chat, I would like to ask you, Valérie, how you experienced the process of these findings when you worked with Francisco, how he related to these findings, what was his reaction to these findings, and your discussion with him on these points. Was it something really new or really strange to you both, or was it something that you expected already?
Well, Actually, Gabor, this is a point. I think the dress came in 2015. So really, it would be
Yes, I know.
precisely the sort of discussion that we would have with Francisco. And I would think that that will give him another argument for the limit of the traditional investigation on cognition in general. It's provide probably, the intuition that, not only the intuition, because it was also a theoretical position, that the color is really a private experience. And to quote Francisco, he mentioned that the properties that specify what color are simply have no non-experiential basis. So this is possibly why color for a visual scientist is so seducing. And I'm now suspecting why Francisco was attracting with this topic. Because in fact, it's very possible that for a scientist studying color, I suppose, is indeed having to forget about this objectivism view of cognition. To have to put it aside, because it's at some point you are blocked with a complete objectivist view of color, meaning that if there is anything in the scene, anything that could allow to predict what color looks like. And although I didn't do possibly enough homework, I would think that for any artificial system, it's probably one of the difficult things for artificial system to have color implemented. So first, actually, artificial system in terms of vision don't need that much color. Interestingly enough, because we have, possibly not all of you, but we knew what was black and white TV, so we don't necessarily need it for many action, for many understanding. So it's not absolutely indispensable, but on the top of that, among all the visual characteristics, color is private. It's a private experience. So well, it doesn't. When I'm saying that, Gabor, it doesn't say that we are not very knowledgeable of color, about color, because you see how screens are fantastic. The way the color industry is working, we can actually match Jaguar pens with exquisite, accuracy. So the color industry is very fruitful. It doesn't mean that it tells us how the color looks like.
I think you made a very good case why the color study is still an important and good case for embodiment and enaction, the perspective that Francisco developed in his Embodied Mind book. Can you give us some other examples where you see that such experiments and such case studies would also help us to understand this term, enaction, better, and how we co-construct our experiences?
If enaction, as I understand it, come as emerging suddenly from how action as well, because the embodied cognition has also this idea that, vision, it's actually, we talk about guided visual action. So with this kind of structural coupling that it has work at the very beginning, and for color with the idea that cultural influence are there. Yes, there has been example. Have myself tested participant in India for the appreciation of perceptual distance between color. So imagine that you get, a full book of color sample with all the color you can imagine, and you can ask individual, to appreciate what are the distance between two different color, which are, above the discrimination threshold. And it's clear that we are at a very elementary level, that those distances are different from a group of young Indian and a group of young British. And what was interesting is that in a part of the color circle, we could see gender differences in England that we were not seeing in India. So there are really subtle influence where showing that there is really a room for color perception to bring into those historical and cultural factors in the way we perceive color. So if enaction, is able to encompass all these elements together with the fact that it's actually each time, a sort of very special encounter between the visual environment, the scene you are looking at, and yourself. Color is a good example.
Thank you, Valerie. While waiting for some questions from our friends here, maybe I can also ask a more personal one. When you joined Francisco in his lab, how did you experience the atmosphere and the special character of his thinking and his work? Was there any unique experience or specialty that you consider being associated with who he was and how he worked and how he did research? And what impact did he have on your way of doing research?
Well, this is many questions. But first of all, you have to realize that at the time, my relationship with Francisco was that of a student and a mentor. So, first of all, I had to understand the paper he gave to me. And I was far away to know that he was working on the embodied mind. So the man, what's special to Francisco? Because I was, expecting this kind of question. One thing is the quality of his attention. That's true. And even, as a student, young student, it was striking because his attention was really focused on this personal interrelationship. In my case, it was mentor-student, but of course, and that has been said several times, together with the quality of his attention, he would go straight to the point. You could come, discuss ideas, and your ideas were not necessarily straight. You need to expand yourself, as you see what I'm doing right now. And with Francisco, it would be just a matter to immediately tell you what you are thinking and to put things right. So that was cool because no waste of time. And this would happen even with chit-chat because we were not always talking science. There is plenty of chit-chat with Francisco. And that is the other thing which could be interesting when you are a student, because the relationship was not, it was of a mentor and a student, but in the same time, he was like me, he was like everybody. So extremely approachable. And that in terms of pedagogy, it's very important because, it leaves just, open play field. There was no, as far I could, there was nothing that couldn't be talked about. And there was no, there was no constraint or, so, yes, I think really that those who were students with Francisco were probably very lucky, because this was not the, this is probably not the situation of any PhD student.
Mm. Thanks for sharing that. Thanks, Valérie. It's great to hear about your personal experiences and how his way of being impacted your research and your work. We received 2 questions in the chat in the meantime, so I would like to ask Rinchen Wanja. Maybe you would like to ask your question live, or you wish me to read it?
Could you read it?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry.
Yes, the question is just for those who watch or who are following us on YouTube. Does color bring a psychological effect, either negative, positive, or neutral? If so, is the red color suitable for our mind in terms of bringing psychological effects?
Yes, I think it's, if there is one aspect that we didn't really focus at the time with Francisco, because it's the emotional implication of color. This is another argument for Francisco to say that why color it's a good example, is to say that color has an immediate meaning. And I like this idea. Among all visual stimuli, if we are talking about, color is elementary stimulus because the processing of color arises very early in there is no need of construction, like, for instance, contrast or orientation. But contrast and orientation, is not immediately meaningful. So certainly emotion is there as well. I'm not the best person to talk about the different symbol in different culture, but okay. One way I can answer this question, yes, surely there are, color has been invested, has been loaded as symbol. That is absolutely true. And that's actually, color can have been used as a symbolic system in prehistoric time, 100,000 years ago or 150,000 years ago, before language. So in other words, there are some evidence in archaeological evidence that prehistorical men were manufacturing pigments and use the color not for in a utilitarian way, but possibly for symbolic purpose. So indeed, I suppose then you can see, and the color red is very particular, but that need to be put in the cultural context in which we study, the meaning of color. There is also this idea that, and we saw that in Christian culture as well, because some colleagues have done that, to name one building that we all Parisians know, Notre Dame, for instance. Notre Dame was the gallery of the king, were highly polychromic. And when a culture is illiterated, the color is actually there to convey information. I mean, when we are saying illiterated, and I don't like that too much, because actually, we may think that color can also be used for communication purpose, even in literate culture. So emotion, and of course with emotion, meaning in symbolism. So this is another extremely fascinating aspect of color. And Francisco doesn't talk about this one. That was actually, it was not what we were doing at the time. I mean, in Embodied Cognition, I haven't read everything. So, I mean, maybe I will find some writing about color symbolism somewhere in Francisco writing, but I will need to
Thank you. Thank you. It's of course important to know what he was thinking about and what he was working on, but also to see the development of this specific study over the years. And you showed great examples of more recent findings as well. So it's great to see where it originated from and where it is today as a field, as a study. Wolfgang Lucas, Wolfgang, you also posted an interesting question in the chat, but you may want to raise it live and loud.
Yes, thank you, Gabor. Thank you, Valérie, for your fascinating presentation, which got me immediately into kind of science geek mode. And so I wanted to ask you something about, I'll rephrase it slightly from how I put it in the chat. If there's a difference for you, or how you think of a difference between color perception and color discrimination. And with kind of two thoughts I had in mind. One was that if you take a dichromate or trichromate or maybe tetrachromate or other organisms that have even more color receptors, they might have different capacities to discriminate certain the spectra of visual cues or visual stimuli. And then you can have a capacity to discriminate them. And then you can give that some meaning based on the ability of discriminating them or not. And I was wondering if that's, I shouldn't say that one is maybe more helpful than the other. They're somehow different to think about how do I perceive color, or how, or am I able to discriminate these two colors? And how does that live in the field between the idealism and the objectivism that you spoke about in the beginning? Somewhere in between them, I feel this way of inaction and making meaning of this. That's not idealism and it's not objectivism, it's something else. But maybe you have some thoughts on this. I hope it was understandable.
I'm very glad that you asked this question, because in fact, this rely more on the line of research that Adrien was in charge of. This color dimension space, which might be tetrachromatic, and the other aspect of enaction, of course, and embodied cognition, is this tight relationship with ecological perspective. So, and color, again, is an example that depending, because this light-matter interaction, the visible spectrum is limited to 400 to 700 nanometer for primates, but of course it goes above and beyond for different species. And also then, depending on what type of photoreceptor on this bandwidth, it provides yet another enacting another color word. And of course, with this enaction come action. And that is, I was saying, after all, the color doesn't, well, now I'm thinking online. I was saying earlier that after all, we don't need what color is for, but for species like bees or fish or birds, it seems to be fundamental, actually. Possibly, yeah. Fundamental for, pollination, for finding, their prey or whatever. So color is really a signal. And it's possible that people who have looked at color vision in insects or birds were less polarized with this objectivism or idealism view, because I'm assuming that they necessarily had immediately an ecological perspective, because in studying other species, you really need to understand where the signal, why this signal, and what is the signal, basically. So, as Francisco has one day quoted, because it was from Huxley, the bees dream of the flower and the flower dreams of the bees. So I am again assuming that those who are doing this job, the research with bees, they, despite the fact that they talk about discrimination, fine discrimination, but fine discrimination is really, I suppose, to describe our system. And I'm not saying that is not useful, but it gives the limit of the system, this quantitative limit of the system, which provide very important things, in particular for color reproduction, because there is no point to go beyond the discrimination threshold. But it doesn't tell us, about it doesn't tell us about the usefulness of color, or how color is used in the behavior, or what is the fundamental property of having a color system. And this co-evolution and this fit between color system and color signal in the real world is a very good example with color, and we are living in a different ecological niche with other species. So thank you for your question, because that is also, that was a fundamental point.
Just to follow up that question, I may ask a more general question: how you see the applicability of the notion of enaction beyond the color studies. There are many approaches to this term in our contemporary and activist circle, studying Francisco's work, studying the implementation of his work, and also potential applications in contemporary situations and societies. Do you have a wider view on the term enaction and its applicability, its potential use in social science, in cultural studies, in the study of religions, and basically also in terms of how we enact our world as humans, as human beings right now?
You are asking a difficult question, Gabor, but the application, I mean, it's engaging only myself, because I think that in terms of experiments, conducting experiments, there has been theory in psychology, and in particular in perception, such as, Gestalt theory, which are extremely seducing because it was the alternative for studying vision in a more Gestalt way, so to speak. But this doing experimentation with that is complicated. And likewise, Gibson, the ecological view of vision, was also extremely seductive, but it's more difficult to make experimentation. So you are talking about practicality. What I see as a practicality for enaction, to me, is in education. It is to provide alternative for students to consider, to understand the living experience. Because I am teaching students, and they are in psychology. And one day I had a student coming to me, saying, wow, you do cognitive psychology. Cognitive psychology is based on information processing systems. The analogy is a computer. And we do tell them about neuroscience, etc. But his question was precisely Francisco's question, meaning it doesn't tell me anything. We have plenty of wonderful theory on attention, but it doesn't tell me anything on how I live it. And actually, the student wants to know that. And so what the application of that is, precisely to provide to provide an alternative in the way we teach some topic to students, for them to have an alternative view on some concept. And perception is certainly one, and a large one.
Thank you, Valérie. When I introduced you, I mentioned that you have been teaching a module since 2016 on embodied cognition and contemplative practice to psychology students. And now you refer to those students. And it's interesting to see these two phrases combined, embodied cognition and contemplative practice. Can you explain that of your work a little bit more? What it means for you to teach a module on contemplative practice in the context of embodied cognition? How you do that?
I still have difficulty to do that. And actually, Ren Chen, which is here, might help me with contemplative practice. I mean, the first part of the course of the module is devoted to the story of cognitive psychology and cognitionism, and then providing some basis for embodied cognition and enaction. And I certainly present the color as a topic, but then I go to the method of first person, and I rely on the work of Claire Ponty-Mungin on microphenomenology, which is interesting because it's a departure from introspection. That there is also it's a method that was there, at the 19th century with not a lot of success. And the idea of contemplative practice is to, it has probably two interests, is first providing this exposure to students as, something which might be extremely useful for them to be acquainted with in the domain of health, mental health, and how students are very aware now of this mental health. And of course, mindfulness has this knowledge, because students are open. So this is really practical, just to demystify contemplative practice, the fact that it's in a module. It's completely voluntary, but they can actually join. And also to have, an entry point eventually for the exploration of the mind, in which then the lecture that I am just step completely out, because it's private experience, but it's to let them know as well that, of course, there is a third person study where we have, very expensive electromagnetic recording, fMRI, all this extremely sophisticated system. But there is possibly also something that can be done, very cheap, that you can start to investigate with your own way, the functioning of your mind. So, yes, the two components was to provide a theoretical framework, more or less successfully, and the second, a method, because we need also a method.
Thank you very much. It makes total sense. And it's so interesting to hear that you combine the theoretical analysis of how the mind functions and the notion of embodied cognition with these more personal, more first-person oriented approaches. And I'm sure it's something very unique for the students as well, studying there. I would like to now turn to you all who are here with us tonight. If you have any last question that we can ask from Valérie. Amy is sending a note in the chat, thanking you for this beautiful presentation and thanking everyone. It's nice to see everyone, she says. Yes, thank you, Amy. And as you know, this is the last event of this Francisco and Friends series this year in 2021. And hopefully we will continue the series in the first half of next year as well, inviting some other friends and researchers who worked and collaborated with Francisco. So we will not end the series at this point, but we will end the talks of this year's season, and we will continue it next year. Hopefully we will see you all back in those next events as well. So any final question from any of you? If not, then I would really like to thank you, Valérie, for your presentation. It was really detailed and very straight to the point, and we understood it, I think, very well, what the meaning of this study is and why it's still a very good case study for enaction. You made it very clear and very engaging for us, I think. I now know much more about why colors function the way they function and why I function myself the way I function. Thank you very much. Thank you all who participated, who joined us tonight, and also who followed us on YouTube. I wish you all a really wonderful evening and a very nice period for the holidays. We will have one last event at Mind and Life Europe, which is not part of this series, but is also an online event in the Mind Matters series. We had 3 other events this year with Matthew Ricard, Mingyur Rinpoche, and Alan Wallace, and we will have one last talk this year on Monday at 6 p.m. Central Europe time with Rebecca Crane, who will talk about her experience teaching mindfulness and how and why integrity as a notion plays a key important role in teaching mindfulness. So I'm looking forward to seeing you all on Monday and in our events next year. Thank you very much. Thank you, Valérie, and thank you, Geneviève, for the French translation.
Gabor, if I may, because although this is not something that Francisco told me, but I saw that in Rio Grande, I think, from the movie. It's the Serenity Prayer. So if this is the last talk, I would like to just say it for all of us.
Absolutely.
So
thank you so much. It's a good.
It says, God grant me the serenity to accept the thing I cannot change, courage to change the thing I can, and wisdom to know the difference. And I learned that from Francisco.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Valérie.
Okay, thank you, and thank you so much for having me.
It's a really auspicious ending and a great blessing for us, from you and from Francisco as well.
Exactly,
Thank you.
from Francisco. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Valérie, and thank you, everyone. See you next time.